Wow, greetings, everyone. I wanted to say something other than well, hello, so I said greetings. And then I ended up saying well, hello anyway, so I don't know if I did anything different. But welcome back. We are in another unit. We're in I'm going to say that's probably a pink dot over there in the corner. If I can. Right there it is, right there. The American banking system. We're just going to talk a little bit about the history of the American banking system because it's something that's just we don't really think much about because the system has been in place for so many years now. We just kind of take things for granted and don't really appreciate what was once the case. And so let's dive right into this particular topic and kind of work through what is the American banking system? Why is it the way it is today? And what did we have to go through to get there? So by the time we are finished with this little briefing, you will be able to contrast the views of Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson on the topic of the national bank and identify the characteristics of the free banking era by completing an assignment to that tune. So, a national bank is, as it sounds, it is simply a bank, the nation's bank. Like, even the United States of America needs a bank to hold the money and take care of it, just like you and I need a bank. We need a place to deposit our money, to withdraw our money, to loan our money, to save our money, to borrow our money. So does the nation. And so the question became, how does the nation do it? And there were opposing views regarding whether or not the United States of America should have a national bank or each state should have its own bank. So this was a this was a battle. This battle is mainly a tension between strong central government and weak central government. The concern for the anti-Feds, remember they were a weaker central government, they wanted stronger state governments, was the rise of a new king. They were always concerned about turning into England again. And the concern for the Feds, the Federalists, they were the people that wanted a stronger federal government. Now, mind you, they didn't want a king either, but they felt like a stronger central government was needed to make sure that things were held in control. So their concern was the lack of unifying strength, that if every state did their own thing, that we would just be a group of separate little states. And they were concerned that that would be a problem. So this was the argument. And it was mainly between, and again, this video here from NBC News, it's a very good little video. I'll put it in the notes for you. But it's something I would advise you to take a look at as well on your own time, as it really kind of paints the picture of what this argument was about. But when we were forming our nation and what it would look like, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson represented two ends of the spectrum. Jefferson, he was an anti-Fed. He was against a national bank. He feared that the wealthy would gain more control over that bank. They would use their resources, influence, and power, and they would abuse it essentially. So he supported a decentralized banking system in which the states would establish and regulate their own banks within their own borders. So Pennsylvania, Ohio, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, they'd all have their own banks. Now, the Federalists were for a national bank, and Alexander Hamilton thought the key to promoting industry and trade would be through a national bank. And that national bank would issue a currency, a national currency that would be the same across all borders, manage federal government funding, and monitor other banks throughout the country to ensure they all played by the same rules and manage their business the same. Ultimately, Alexander Hamilton would win the day, and we would have the establishment of the first national bank of the United States, which was established in 1791, thus really early on after the ratification of our Constitution. It was given a 20-year charter, which basically means it was allowed to run for 20 years before Congress would vote to do anything different. It succeeded in unifying and strengthening the nation's banking industry, but complaints existed that small farms and businesses were refused loans. The Anti-Federalists still maintained that the bank's existence was unconstitutional because the Constitution did not grant the federal government permission to establish it in the first place. So the government did not renew the charter after the 20 years had passed. And so state banks began to pop up all over the place to fill the void that this first bank in the United States had left by its non-renewal. It didn't work out well because in 1816, the second Bank of the United States was established. Congress hoped to alleviate the chaos caused by the state banks, which we'll talk about later, by establishing a second national bank. A fellow by the name of Nicholas Biddle was elevated to president of the Second National Bank and restored stability. Again, the instability from state banks is just basically going to be the formation of each state having its own currency, each state regulating and having different rules for their banks. And so it worked well within the state, but whenever state was trying to do business with another state, that's when things got messy. A national bank set the standard across the board for all states. Everybody had to play by the same rules. The Supreme Court ended the constitutionality argument by ruling that a national bank was in fact constitutional. However, Andrew Jackson, who was the president at the time and not in favor of a national bank, basically ignored the Supreme Court's ruling and did not renew the charter of or actually he vetoed the charter of the Second National Bank in 1832. So once again, we were without a national bank, creating what is called the free banking era. So once again, just like the first time, a number of state-run banks began to pop up, but this time it tripled, which gave rise to a series of problems listed here, such as bank runs. Often banks did not keep enough money in reserve, which would create panic and cause people to literally run to the bank. When everyone or most of the people with money in a particular bank wanted to withdraw all of their money at the same time for fear that the bank would run out of money before they could get theirs. So a bank run, what happened in the night during the Great Depression of the 1920s or 1930s was banks obviously do not keep all of, when you put money in a bank, they don't keep all that money. They take that money and loan it out to other people. So if everybody who put money in a bank ran to the bank and wanted all their money right now, the bank wouldn't have enough money. If the bank didn't keep enough money on hand, they kept very little money on hand, and word got out that the bank had just a little bit of money, they didn't have a lot, everybody would run to the bank and try to get their money before the bank ran out. Then a panic would occur, much like the panic of the toilet paper during the pandemic. There was probably more than enough toilet paper to go around had people not rushed to all those shopping stores and started buying more than they needed. And because people bought more toilet paper than they needed, we had scarcity and we ran out of toilet paper. So same is for the money. People would run to banks. They wouldn't just take out a little bit to get them by. They would just take out their whole account. They didn't need to, but because this person did and person B did and person C did, the bank would run out of money. A bank run would ensue, and when the bank ran out of money, they'd go out of business. So bank runs occurred. Wildcat banks. These were banks that were so far out in the country that people joked that only wildcats could bank there. Fraud. This is banks that would collect money from people. They would issue banknotes, and then they would disappear, and they would take all the money and run. So basically, they were thieves. And then finally, multiple currencies. Each state would issue its own currency, and that may not be of the same value of other states, and it just created a lot of chaos. So the free banking era was just chaos and madness. Eventually, stability would need to come in later, and that's what we're going to talk about in our next unit. So, for this instance, or for our purposes here, we simply wanted to accomplish the idea of what in the world. What was the difference in the opposing viewpoints between Hamilton and Jefferson regarding the existence of a national bank? And we want to talk about what bank runs, wildcat banks, fraud, and issuing multiple currencies. What era of the banking history of America did that represent? The free banking era. Altogether, there you have it. When we return, we'll talk a little bit about how this kind of thing settled down and we get to our modern day version of the bank, which is the Federal Reserve. So we will talk about that when we return. I'll see you then.